What's going on, sports card hobby family? Back from Cleveland and the National, feeling a little refreshed. I slept really hard last night. Got over the haunted spirits that were there in the Airbnb, the twin bed, back in my bed, back with the fam. It was all good. Alf missed me, as you can see. Alf, you okay? Hasn't really said too much since I got back, but sometimes it takes him a little while to open up. We've got a special episode of the Pick Six podcast with DPZ and Drake. I was doing all the national content over the weekend. Typically their show is on Saturday, but today it is going to be today. We're going to flip over to them in a minute. But first I have to thank today's video sponsor, COMC.com. 35 million cards in the database. They had a massive booth over there in the National that was absolutely packed. All sorts of deals on COMC, whether it's non-sports, baseball, basketball, football, and just very easy to get in and out of cards on the site. So make sure to check out COMC.com. Also, you've got autographs. You just bought beautiful cards at the National, but do you have UV protection? Use Sports Card Dad promo code for 10% off your SlabMags order. Last but certainly not least, the Hakes auction is ending in a few days. Nice vintage sports cards, Type 1 photos, all sorts of unique items over there on Hakes Auction, so make sure to check them out. Frank, do we have DPZ? Are they ready? Can we go ahead and flip the switch? Can we flip the switch? All right, let's do it.
Welcome, friends, to another episode of the Pick Six podcast. It is the week of the National, and I'm not going, which is fine, but my buddy Drake is going, and I'm excited to live through him as he goes, and all of you other wonderful collectors out there that I follow, and to see what everybody says about their experience at the National this year in Cleveland. But let's talk about cards right now. Let's talk about what we've got in our hands, mail days. Let's talk about what you're planning to do at National, Drake. I want to hear your plan, if you have one, and any other questions that might have popped up in the past few days.
Yeah, absolutely. It's great to be back. I know we were off last week. We're first glad that you safely made it home from the last podcast episode when you were driving in traffic and recording at the same time. That certainly was not recommended from a safety point of view, but you successfully made it home, and then glad that you're on the mend after a little sickness last week. So, but yeah, it's National Week this week. Gosh, the past couple of weeks, just for me personally, have been crazy with the amount of cards that have been presented to me for, to buy, to trade, things that I've sold. I've probably had more activity these past 2 weeks than in the last 6 months. And it's a lot of fun to connect and really start, talking to people that are going to the National and starting to plan things out and when they're going to be there and where you can meet up and where they're staying, and let's meet for dinner, and let's, we're going to exchange this card in a deal, and so and really just kind of things like that. So that's the thing I'm most looking forward to about this week, is getting a chance to see my hobby friends, right? Some of them I talk to once a day, once a week, once a month. I'm ready to see that. I've got a couple friends that actually live in the Cleveland area, and so it'll be nice to go into their backyard because they'll know all the hot restaurants and hot spots and things like that. And I'm also looking forward to, I've got, so Nat Turner with PSA is giving a free look on some higher end cards that I have to see, before submitting for a crossover or before you spend time and money to crack it out and all that, to look at your card inside of the holder and see if it would cross to a certain grade that you would like for the card. So like I've got my Peyton Manning 24 karat gold in the BGS 9. I'd like to see if that would cross to PSA 9. And then my Peyton 2012 Prism Gold has some really high subgrades in a BGS 9.5. So I want to see if that'll cross to a 10. And then finally, the last thing I'm doing kind of prep wise is I'm going to be submitting cards to PSA, but I'm not going to be giving them to PSA myself because I don't really need them back quickly. So the pricing at the show is pretty high, but I sub through a group submitter who always does a really nice job for me, DT Sports Cards. And so I'm going to be hand delivering him some cards to submit to PSA for me. So that keeps them away from the mail. And that's always a good thing. But speaking of mail, why don't we get into some mail days, right?
Let's do it. What do you got, bud? Let's start with you.
Well, so I want to start with kind of some cool things. So we'll look at these cards, and it's a few cards, and it's Peyton Manning. Let's see if I can get these right. This is the rookie year Pacific Aurora, and this was a Drew Brees top of the class kind of insert rookie from Pacific. And then here's some Upper Deck sweet spots of Drew Brees and Peyton. And what's neat about these is there's a guy, his name's KS for Kansas Card Collector on Instagram. And this will lead into one of our topics here after a while. And he's a guy I connected with. I actually bought a Peyton Manning card from him a few years ago. And when I had business needs to be in Wichita, Kansas, I went over to his house and we talked cards for a few hours and had some pizza with him and his wife. And we were talking hobby and doing that sort of stuff and everything. Well, he's getting married and is selling off a big chunk of his collection to help pay for the wedding and other, non-hobby needs and things like that. And he just said, as he was going through his collection, he saw some Peyton Manning and Breeze cards and said, if there's anybody that needs to have these cards in their collection, that would be Drake. So he sent them to me. I posted about it on my Instagram a little while ago, but he sent those to me in the mail. They showed up. It was a surprise. I wasn't expecting it. He had a very nice note with it. And these will be cards that I will cherish and hang on to forever. That is one thing. If I'm ever gifted a card, I will never sell it, trade it, nothing like that. It doesn't matter the value. It's all the sentimental and that personal connection piece to me. So his name is Trevin Hunter. So if he's listening, just want to give him a shout out and say thank you for the very nice gesture that you made.
Very cool. That's awesome, man. Very cool.
Yeah, it's always good. And I always try to find ways to return the favor. So share a quick mail day. This is the Peyton Manning 2015 Prism Gold Vinyl. And these are numbered out of 5, and this happens to be number 1 out of 5. They kind of have the gold vinyls have a super fractor type finish to them.
Yeah.
And so this is one that I got in a trade with Instagram name is Wardle Combat Paul. And this was one of those cards that he had in his collection for a while. It's the only one that I've ever seen. I've never seen another copy of the Peyton 2015 Prism Gold Vinyl. And it kind of makes sense, right? It's numbered out of 5. So you would think they would be, pretty rare just by numbering alone. But I'd always ask him if that was available. And he was no. And then finally I made a card available for my collection that he wanted. And that was something that he offered up as part of the trade. And so super excited to have that one in my collection. I love that it's the first year of the Prism Gold Vinyl. I love it. It has a super fractor finish. I'm a big Topps guy, as most of you know. And then I think it's really neat that it's it's the first one in the serial numbering out of 5. So I'm super gracious to Paul for letting that one go. And that one's headed straight to the PC. So
very cool. Very cool. Is that it?
Well, I mean, I can always share more, right? You know what?
Well, you just the mail day. I'm just trying. We can start sharing more.
Yeah. I mean, so we'll go to the Peyton Manning. This is the PMG 1999. So this also came from Paul as part of the trade. These other cards did too. So PSA 9 Pop 1. Most people know 90s cards like this are super tough grades. I mean, I look over this card. I don't see any kind of imperfections. I actually had a PSA 8 that I traded to him to get this 9, and the PSA 8 was a Pop 7. I moved into the PSA 9 Pop 1, so I think that's pretty cool. It also matches my 98 PMG PSA 9 of Peyton, so super pumped on that one. And then finally, this last thing from Paul, this is the Peyton Manning 2013 Select Gold PSA 10, and so this was the first year of Select. Pop 1. I had a BGS 9.5. He was interested in that, so I moved into the PSA 10. So this was more about getting one new card, but also upgrading to PSA 10s on some cards. I know many folks who watch the show are, there's everybody has an opinion about what you grade. Should you grade? Do you take out a one holder to PSA? Is PSA better than BGS? That whole sort of thing. But for me, it's the move that I wanted to make for my collection. And so that's what I did. And he was open to it. And I'm excited to have these in my collection. So that's the mail days.
Very, very cool. No, that's fun. My mail day is very simple. It's one. I have 2 cards coming in from PSA that I graded. I bought raw from my buddy Rodney, big, great Griffey collector, that are not here yet. They haven't been delivered, so I can't really share them. But there's a PSA 7 and a PSA 8. Not the grades I was hoping for, but one of them's out of 55, the other one's serial out of 100. Sort of obscure cards, Donruss and Upper Deck Ionics. So looking forward. I can share those next week, hopefully. But The card I did get, actually I have another one. I'm going to pick it up later today, which I'm going to pose a question to the group or anybody who's listening today. And I want to poll and find out if people thought I made the right choice. But this is the card I got recently. See it? It is a 95 finest refractor Ken Griffey Jr. Pop 14 PSA 10. This card sometimes has a refractor line. I do not see a refractor line in this one, so I think we're good. Great card, OG refractor from Ken Griffey Jr. 93, 94, 95. Just had one refractor in those sets, and 93 was obviously the first one. I have a 93 and a 10. I had a 94 and a 10 that I bought raw, and I sold it. I'm now looking to obtain another one so I can make that nice little 3-card run of the simple 1-card refractor before it all got crazy in 96, 97. So, yeah, that's my card. But the other mail day I would have is technically I have the card with me, but I'm not going to show it because I'm going to trade it. I bought a card from my buddy Brent, and I decided, you know what? Because he had these BGS 10 Ken Griffey Jr. 1989 Upper Deck cards. BGS 10, not a 9.5, not a PSA 10. That's a Pop 114, I believe. The cards are similar in value. The card that I bought from him was an 86 Topps Traded Tiffany Barry Bonds PSA 10. And I just decided, you know what? Looking at the two cards together, I kind of preferred the BGS 10. And he said, yeah, you can have either one. Which one would you want? So I initially chose the 86 Traded PSA 10 Bonds, but now we're going to go back. And today I'm going to swap it out for the BGS 10 Upper Deck Ken Griffey Jr., the OG card, the card that started it all, in a BGS 10. So my question to everybody is, did I make the right decision? Should I have kept the Bonds, PSA 10, 86 Topps Traded Tiffany, or is the BGS 10 Griffey and the 89 Upper Deck the better long-term card to have? Which one would you prefer? Don't say neither, because you have to pick one. If you had to pick one of those two cards, which one would it be? Which one do you feel more confident in long-term? So the comments below, it's a big question. I really want to hear what everybody has to say, because I think what factors into this is, okay, they're both, one's a more rare card in general, because the Tiffany sets were more rare. So that's a plus for the card. The BGS 10, it's a lower pop than even the PSA 10 Bonds, but they're still printing those 89 Upper Deck cards, right? So as we all joke about, there's so many of them, but it does create a market for a more rare version of that card. Then you factor in the biggest question mark of all, BGS 10 Beckett. Long-term sustainability of that brand, is that going to even matter later? I have a BGS 10 87 Topps Tiffany Barry Bonds BG as well. So now I'm two in. I got two pristine 10s. But is that going to matter later, or is the PSA 10 going to catch up and make it irrelevant? That's another question for everybody. I know we've already talked about that, but it really factors into this decisioning, right? Which one do I have? Obviously, Griffey. I'm a Griffey guy. I'm going to lean that way. So, question for everybody below. Love to hear what everybody thinks. But yeah, that's all I got.
That's good. That's great. Well, I guess I'll give my opinion. You didn't ask for it, but I'll give it anyways. I'd rather have the Griffey personally. I think it's a more iconic card when you look through, the card history, right? I think the 86 Fleers on there and the 52 Mantle and, the 89 Griffey, and that's an iconic card for that reason. And so I think you made the right move. People can talk about BGS and, I think we all have our opinions and most of them are true, but, getting into a BGS 10, like BGS 10s are tough to get. It's not something they hand out left and right. So I think that's the card I'd rather have in my collection. But it's interesting you talking Griffey and Bonds. It seems like in the last month or two, maybe there's been this huge resurgence of Barry Bonds was a better player than Griffey, or Barry Bonds is the best player, and all that sort of stuff. And so I think it's an interesting conversation to have about, who was the best player in that era? Was it Bonds, Griffey? Was it somebody else? And I'm just trying to understand why all of a sudden Barry Bonds is just getting this huge surge behind him. And he's been retired for years and he's not an active player. So I don't know if you're seeing that as well, DPZ,
yeah,
or if you have any thoughts around that.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And I think, I think it's two things. I think you see people like David Ortiz making the Hall of Fame, Todd Helton, nothing against Todd Helton. But some of these players they're not transcending the sport. Their numbers are not even close. I know they're okay. He didn't cheat. There's a lot of speculation about how many pitchers were taking steroids, and was the playing field as level as we thought it was, or not as level as we thought it was. I mean, it might have been more leveled. Who knows? And I think when you also look at Bonds. This has always been the argument for me for Bonds. Both him and Griffey were two of my favorites growing up, right? So I just love them from a baseball standpoint. When I was collecting cards, I'd always look for Bonds and Griffey when I was a kid, but Griffey was always my favorite. Bonds just seemed very prickly. He didn't transcend the sport like Griffey. Griffey had a video game. He had a shoe. He was on TV shows. I mean, everybody knew who he was, right? The hat backwards. I mean, he's got a different reputation than Bonds, but Bonds was a better player overall. He had a better career. He's more established. He could have been probably the best player to ever play. He's up there with Babe Ruth. Now, people argue, well, the steroids. Yeah, but does that really allow you to hit the ball? I mean, either you're a good baseball player or you're not a good baseball player. So before he allegedly took anything, he was really, really good. He was a 400 player. 400 home runs, 400 stolen bases. I mean, he was a complete player. He was a Gold Glove outfielder, one of the best outfielders to ever play. He was a complete player, and he was really, really, really good. And the story goes that he's a 40-40 player. That is I think a third or fourth 40-40 season. I could be wrong on that. But he was just a perennial all-star, all-time great. Up to that point. This is about 99, 98. And he's watching Mark McGwire and Sammy Sosa hit home run after home run after home run. And they're getting all this attention, all this love, and all this, this glorification. And he's sitting here playing the game really, really well at a high level. And no one's paying attention to him, right? So I think that it might have been an ego thing. And I think the story goes that he met with Griffey. They had lunch or did something. He's like, hey, I'm going to start doing this. And Griffey's like, I'm not doing that. But he's like, well, look what's going on. I mean, these guys are getting all the attention. It's not a level playing field. It's not fair. And it's a story. It could not, maybe it's not true. It makes for a good story. And then Griffey goes on and gets hurt, doesn't play. And, his reputation is his reputation. But Bonds goes on and has the last half of his career was almost better than the first half, which made no sense. And I think some of that, so if you take some of that with a grain of salt, those last few years, even up to that point where he decided to potentially to in his mind, level the playing field with a bunch of other players, or just cheat, which is not okay. He still was an all-time great player. He was still comparable to Griffey, if not better, and statistically. And so I think people are realizing that. You see people like Ortiz getting in, Piazza, people that were Ivan Rodriguez. These are players that were perceived to have done the same thing. And they're in the Hall of Fame. And there's some people in the Hall of Fame where it doesn't really make sense why they're in the Hall of Fame. It's starting to become kind of like, is the Hall of Fame really that big of a deal? So you take that out of it now. Okay, that gives Alex Rodriguez, Mark McGwire. But I don't know. Like Alex Rodriguez and Barry Bonds are just different. Roger Clemens, same thing. Those are real great players well before anybody thought they were doing anything. So in my opinion, they all belong in the Hall of Fame. Mm-hmm. Mark McGwire, probably not. That guy was built on steroids, right? Everything he did was because of steroids. He's a memorable player from the 80s, but because of, I feel like steroids, him and Canseco, steroids made them the player. Bonds, A-Rod, and Clemens, these guys were amazing naturally. They were already Hall of Famers naturally. So, I kind of feel like, if Mike Trout was taking steroids, then he'd be killing it right now, right? And he wouldn't be getting hurt as much. So you can tell that's natural for your body to break down and for it to become difficult to attain these numbers outside of being, longevity. There's Albert Pujols there's been whispers about what he's done. So I think you factor all that in. You look at a guy like Bonds, who's so good. People look at the price differentiation between Bonds and Griffey, and they go, well, doesn't make any sense. And maybe there's a correction that's going to be happening. I don't know. I also think there's a massive migration to the 90s right now. Yep. Everybody's tired of modern. This whole the Breakers Delight box, all that stuff. I think modern is scaring everybody away. And so people in our age bracket, that 35 to 50, that are buying cards, collecting cards again. They're like, they're not. It's not as appealing. So where's a logical place to go? Let's go to the 90s. We might not have collected during the 90s, but all the players that we love are in the 90s and all those sets. These amazing designs, these amazing sets, serial number. At the end of the day, there are not enough cards to go around for the demand that there's going to be for the big sets for certain players. There's set collector players like the random players and all those sets, the Eddie Jones and people like that, using a basketball player, that they may not be an all-time great player, but the set matters and people need to collect the set, so that card's going to matter. But then there's just the players that matter, like Barry Bonds, Ken Griffey Jr., Peyton Manning, Drew Brees. Drew Brees wasn't in the 90s, but sort of. Insert player that's great. Marvin Harrison, like Jerry Rice, Brett Favre. I mean, keep going. These great players. Barry Sanders. These great players. You put them in that category. Those cards for those players and those in that time frame, I think are gonna matter to all of us that grew up with those players, and are gonna want those cards that are serial number, that are rare. There's something to them that you feel like you can be part of a club by owning them too. That's kind of a fun feeling, is when you own a certain card, you're part of like an exclusive club that gets to own that card of that player or just that set. That's kind of fun. That's kind of like a little exclusive club you get to be part of. There's nothing wrong with that. I think that there's something about that that's exciting. Like Brent and I were talking about that yesterday. We got some dinner and we're talking about that. The feeling of being included into when you have a card, which is kind of fun. So I think all of those things factor into certain players are going to start getting more love, in my opinion. I think the 90s I've always been a 90s guy, but I think, some of those cards are going to matter. I know it's a complete change from my frustration with being misled on certain cards that shouldn't matter to me, but I think there's just I'm going through all these different phases of collecting, and I just find myself continuing to kind of fall back into that 90. And Griffey drives it because I'm buying his cards from that era, but then I start looking at some of these other cards and other players, and I'm like, okay, will I go back and get David Robinson? Probably not. But will I try to earmark or find a PMG that makes sense from a player that I really like? Maybe. I don't know. It just very long-winded answer to your question, but I just think that that's what's going on, Drake. And honestly, I got to throw a shout out, Precious Metal Gents. What a great program! I've been listening to those guys the past few weeks, and they're having collectors being interviewed, talking about their stories, opening cards or opening cases and packs when they're younger, what got them into it, the cards they collect, the players and how they target them. That stuff to me is fascinating. I enjoy the heck out of it because at the end of the day, you want to be a collector, right? It's really fun to hear about that and how they went about getting a card, the story behind it. That stuff is so cool to me. So thank you for recommending them to me. And if anybody out there wants to be picked up and enjoy a great collecting content, go check out that channel at Spotify.
Yep, absolutely. Well, good stuff. All right, well, let's get in. We did get a couple of listener questions, so we'll get into that. And I'll take the first one just from an experience standpoint. But AJM Cards 94, Adam, who I'm actually going to meet at the National this week, he wants to know. He said, "What are the differences in the National in Cleveland and Chicago?" And so this will be my first time to Cleveland for the National. My first time to Cleveland, actually, like I mentioned. So I can't speak a ton other than what I've heard. So I'll try to just expand on that just a little bit from what I do know. I can tell you about Chicago. I've been there a few times now. So Chicago's great because you land at the airport, at O'Hare Airport. You don't have to worry about a rental car, anything like that. Name your favorite hotel chain is right around the convention center. So they typically have transit, the shuttle vans that go back and forth between the hotel and the airport. Don't have to worry about a rental car. It takes you right to the hotel. And then the convention center, all the hotels are within walking distance of the convention center. Now, some are maybe a little further. You may have to get like an Uber, walk up, 3/4 of a mile or something like that. But everything's walkable. There's great restaurants in the area, for all different budgets. There's restaurants in the hotels. There are, mid-end restaurants to higher-end restaurants, things like that. The convention center is just massive. In my opinion, it's almost too big because there's just so much to look at. It's like sensory overload when you're at the National, and when you're in Chicago. The food choices are terrible. I'm not paying $10 for a hot dog. And so it's important. It's important to bring your food, when navigating Chicago and things like that. So that's kind of around that. Now, when you get into Cleveland, the Expo Center is right next to the airport. So you land at the airport and you can see you can see the center where the National will be held. But, unless you want to stay at a place that rents rooms by the hour, you're going to have to travel a little bit. And so it does essentially require you to get a rental car, which I'm doing. My hotel that I'm staying at is about a 10-minute drive away. So it's reasonably close. My understanding is that the convention center is a little bit smaller than the Stevens Center in Chicago. But there is ample parking around there. So folks that do have to drive and things like that. That actually was the reason I got the VIP package this year, was really for the parking pass, so that I would have somewhere close to park up close to the convention center. I have heard that the food options are a little bit better. I think it's nice that all the trade nights this year, it's not really a Cleveland, Chicago thing, but all the trade nights this year will be at the convention center versus, different hotels and things like that. Although I'm sure that there will still be all types of card happenings that are going on at the hotel. So that's probably the biggest difference is just one, everything's it's a one-stop shop right there. You don't have to worry about a rental car or anything like that, versus the other, you have to drive a little bit. Like I said, I've never been to Cleveland before, so I'm looking to driving around some, may go catch a Guardians game, see Lake Erie, if my geography is correct, right up there. They've got the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame there. You could drive south to Canton to the Pro Football Hall of Fame. So yeah, just a lot going on, and so I think it's not a bad thing to have to drive around a little bit and get to stay off your feet some, because when you walk around all day at the National, you sometimes can, and it's on a concrete floor, even if you're wearing tennis shoes, you hurt in places you didn't even know you had places. And so it's certainly good to get off your feet when you can.
Very good. That's good. Great advice for people that are getting ready to go. I think convenience is important. If you can be in one spot, everything can be, conveniently located. I think that matters. I think most people would take that over, much else. Because if you can just walk to and fro anywhere you need to go, it just makes it more appealing. At least it does to me. That's something I'd vote for. More convenience, everything being right there, and not just shuttling to a hotel, and the convention center's right there. I mean, gosh, that sounds just right. It sounds right down the alley for me. So
yep, exactly. But just like I said, I'm looking forward to experiencing the city some. Chicago I've been to multiple times before, but say when you go to the National in Chicago, if you're wanting to experience the city, you've got to go sit in that traffic to get downtown, and it's a haul, 30 to 45 minutes to get downtown. So we're all going for the same reason. But I always, as someone who travels for work frequently, I do like to explore the area and see what's out there, and try something new. So anyway,
very cool.
All right,
very cool. All right, what else you got?
So the next one, and I'll let you take this one first, but this comes from Mad City Collector, and he said there could be lots of negative noise in the hobby. We certainly know that's true. How do you tune it out and just enjoy collecting?
Well, I think you limit what you watch, what you hear. There's a function on your Instagram where you can mute people. They don't know. No one's going to get hurt feelings. And you can hide content from appearing in your feed. I think you have control over that. So maybe just maybe mute some of those folks that you just don't want to be hearing from every day. If you want to just stay away from the market, maybe mute some of the stuff coming from Card Ladder so you don't see what eye-catching sales happening and getting you all going. Just enjoy your cards. Take a couple weeks where you just don't consume any content. Or if you do consume content, it's stuff like the show I mentioned earlier, where you have collectors talking to collectors about cards and the cards, the players they collect and their journeys and all of that stuff, because that kind of can help you. That's a great way to help re-identify what matters. I can what's uncomfortable and frustrating and kind of embarrassing for me is I'm chronicling all my feelings on these shows. So you go back and watch these shows. Oh, Dennis is all about 80s cards now. Oh, wait, now he's all about 90s again. Oh, he's not about 90s anymore. He feels misled. Oh, now he's back in the 90s. I'm going back and forth, back and forth, and back and forth. I think some of that, though, is you're being influenced, right? And all of us get influenced to one degree or another, unless you completely remove any kind of content that you're consuming. So if it's just pure raw, what do I care about? It's a great place to kind of re-identify what matters to you. So by quieting all the noise, you focus and hone in on what's great about cards. So if I'm not listening to noise, if I'm not being influenced by anything other than my pure desire, when I receive my PSA 7 and PSA 8 of these Griffies that I submitted, I'm not worried that they're not a PSA 10. Okay? The PSA 10 snobbery goes away. I'm like, I just love these cards. They're so cool looking. And they're numbered, so there's only so many. Well, one of them is not officially serial numbered, but it's a stated print run. But nonetheless, you get the point. I appreciate the provenance of the card and the look, the aesthetic look, and how cool it is to own it. And I'm not so worried about what does everybody think of it. How many likes am I going to get from my post, right? We all love sharing our cards. Nothing wrong with that. But you sort of like, I'm just, okay, what's important to you with a card? The story, all that stuff. When it becomes about that, I think that's kind of where your true ground is, right? That's like your foundation of what matters for cards. When you quiet all that other stuff, the market, all that kind of stuff, then you can identify what really matters. And so that would be my advice. It's just like mute, control what you're consuming so that you can enjoy the cards and find and kind of read it. Yeah, that.
Yeah, I certainly would agree with that as well. I also think it's important to, learn who you surround yourself with. Like I've mentioned before, I'm in a Peyton Manning collector chat. I'm in a wrestling card collector chat. I'm in a Drew Brees collector chat and that sort of thing. And we just talk about cards and talk about the hobby, and we'll do trade deals, and we talk about life and our families and things like that. And as I'm scrolling through Instagram or some other social media, if I see some of that stuff, like you referred to DPZ, I scroll past it. I may chuckle or laugh or something like that, but I just keep on scrolling. But I think the trap that people may fall into, and I think it goes back to the influence thing, is that many people in the hobby get sucked into, you need to buy this or you need to buy that or that sort of thing. And then you get into that, and it's kind of like that vortex. And then, you see this content about it, you get all excited about it, you do it, and the next thing you know, that person that influenced you to get into that has moved on to something else. So then you feel like, oh shoot, like I don't need to be in this anymore, I need to go do that. And so then you're always just chasing something. And so I think, I say all that to say, I think the way to avoid the negativity is just, understand that social media is a highlight reel for people, and people are going to do stuff that makes them look good. And, they're not going to share their failures. They're just going to share their banger pickups and, this and that and the other. Like I've long said, it's not a bad thing to share things that you've sold, or like, hey, I've traded this or I've sold this or whatever, so that people, get full disclosure of your hobby experience. I think that's super important as well. But I think if you just kind of navigate your own way, you're doing your own research, trying to be as little influence on the outside as you can, I think that's going to give you a greater hobby experience throughout. But if you're always chasing the next big thing, or you're like, oh, well, this person's doing this, so that means that I need to do that. This person's buying black prisms, so I need to buy black prisms. And if I can't find a black prism, then I'm a failure. Let's say, like you're always going to be disappointed, or if you're always trying to keep up with the Joneses, so to say, you're always going to be disappointed, because there's always going to be someone that has a better collection than you, or a better card, or is getting more likes on their post or something like that. So I think you just have to go to what makes you happy, and try to find people that like-minded people that you can talk with, and not always be focused on what everybody else is talking about or trying to make somebody else happy. Right? If you're buying a card because you're like, ooh, as soon as I get this in, so many people are going to like this and comment it, and they're going to think that I'm just something, right? Probably not the reason to buy the card, because you're going to be disappointed after that initial euphoric high, right? Then you're going to be like, well, do I even really like this? Why did I buy this? Why did I have this? And the last thing I'll say, DPZ, that was a point you made that I wanted to hit on a little bit is, you can be influenced in certain ways. And we always give our good friend and friend of the show, Brett McGrath, Stacking Slabs, in our Peyton Manning group chat, we give him grief because, when he returned to the hobby, he'll admit that he kind of followed things a little bit. And he went down collecting Sekou Dimboya, a guy for the Pistons. And he was going hard on this guy and thought he was the next big thing and that sort of thing. And then it got to a point where he's like, I don't even really know why I'm collecting this guy. So then he sold that collection and went and things like that. And so I think, to your point about, you feel like a sense, or others may feel like you're flip-flopping a little bit. I think it's just how we all evolve as a collector. I mean, there's things that I think about that I bought, even a year ago or 6 months ago. And I'm like, that's not something that I would have bought today. And so, and there's things that I'm picking up now that maybe 6 months from now, I may feel differently on. That doesn't make me any less of a collector or anything like that. It's just, you're always evolving and growing as a person. But I think it's just important that you evolve and grow based on your own and other like-minded people around you, and you're not evolving and growing because of influence completely by the outside.
Gotcha. Love it. That's really good stuff. I think we're up against it here, about 35 minutes. I'm excited to hear how the National's going to go. I'm excited to hear all your stories and your feedback and your experiences, everything, next week when we get back together and talk about cards. But I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. Please comment below and tell us what you think below. We both like to talk about all these things, and so we'd love to hear what you want to say too, and what your feedback is, especially with some of those questions earlier in the episode. Have a safe trip, buddy. Hope it's fun.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I'm excited to leave. I head out tomorrow, which will be Wednesday morning. I know this will air Saturday, but head out Wednesday morning. I'll be there through Saturday afternoon. If you're there and you catch the show, or hopefully you've been a long-time listener and viewer, certainly feel free to say hi if you see me. Would love to meet friends of the show. And then one other thing, I was actually on a guest on the Stacking Slabs podcast that will have dropped on Friday, July 26th. So we did talk a lot about the show and a lot about collecting, and the topic there was the art of consistently upgrading your collection. So if you're interested in that, certainly check out Brett's show, Stacking Slabs podcast. So
sounds good. Well, everybody, you take care out there. Have fun collecting cards. Stay positive, and we'll catch you on the other side. Take care, everyone.